Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining today to the Airlock webinar about how to switch to the Loginapp RESTUI. My name is Cyril and I'm pleased to be your host for the next hour. With me is Dimos, our head of Airlock webinars, and he will assist me in the background as we go through the slides. Dimos will directly answer your questions through the presentation or bring them up at the end. To ask questions, use the separate tool that you will see while you are in the live webinar. The tool is on the GoToMeeting on the left side. There are two tools. There is actually a chat tool. Don't use the chat tool to ask questions. Use the Fragen tool or the question tool to do so. You can ask questions public or private. If you ask them private, only you and Dimos will see them. If you ask them public, all the participants will see them. We'll record this webinar. Dimos, did we start the recording?
Yes, we did. Hello, everyone.
Perfect. So after the session, you will get a link to the recordings and the slides. The webinar will be approximately 60 minutes, and as we go to the slides, I will turn my camera now off. So before we go to the agenda of today's webinar, I want to fix with you some terms which are important for today. So first of all, we have the old JSP login app. That's the UI that most of your end users are probably seeing today if they're using the Airlock login or self-services or other screens that are coming directly from our product. We'll also talk about the new components, and the new UI is actually built on the IAM REST APIs with the corresponding flows. So we have the new UI, which we call IAM Loginapp RESTUI. And with the new UI, we have a special SDK for the web developers, which we call IAM Loginapp RESTUI SDK. So these are the most important terms of today's webinar. And let's look at how these components are work together. So when we talk about the IAM Loginapp, then we have a web interface within the IAM Loginapp, which allows the old UIs, the JSP Loginapp, to communicate over HTML. A few years ago, more and more native apps came on the market, and also for our Airlock customers, native apps start to get important. And for the native apps, you need a good solution. And as we found out with time, REST APIs are the right solution for apps. And we started to integrate them within the IAM Loginapp. So the native apps now had their own interface where they could do the login or self-service with the JSON protocol. Now, of course, the native apps with the new powerful flows being on the new world and the JSP login app still being on the old world, didn't have always the same flow. And for us, a lot of features we needed to build double. We needed to build them in the web and in the REST API. That's why we created the new UI to replace the JSP login app, and the new UI we call Loginapp RESTUI. This new UI is also using the REST API interface, which brings a lot of advantages, which we see in a moment. The new UI also can be used with a hybrid app directly on an app, which are multiple Airlock customers doing at the moment already. So this gives just another option with other advantages. Having now cleared it with all the terms that we are using for today, or the most important ones, let's go to the agenda. In today's webinar, we will look at why you should change to the new IAM Loginapp RESTUI. When is it a good time to change? How should we proceed to do the change? And what support is available for the change? Let's start off why we should change. And the big answer to the question is actually that the REST API within IAM Loginapp is flow-based. That means you can really configure now a customer journey which fits your Airlock customer. For this these flows, we have different steps built in the product. We have authentication flow steps, which are the steps where a user actually provides his password or second factor, or can do a password change or add some profile data. We have so-called flow control steps, which help you to go through the flow with a selection that allows you to make a fork, or on a certain step with a goto, you can go to another step. Or you can also, with skip conditions, skip a step. We have so-called self-services step, which helps you for user registration, or for token migration, or for other self-service cases for the end user. And we have so-called authorization steps, which helps you to get the whole permission, like roles. You can give or take away certain tags, and you can show the terms and conditions to the user, or even get certain consents from him directly within a flow. With all these steps together, we can build flows. Here you see an example flow. So this is an example flow of login, where we see it starts with a password check. That means on that point here, on that step, the user enters his username and password. Then we go to a selection, and the selection checks the auth method of the user that at the moment tries to log in. And if the user is still on mtown, we'll have after he successfully entered the code he got via message on his mobile, he gets directed to the migration to Airlock 2FA step. After he has first login, after he went to the selection, we'll check if he has a password change enforced. And as I said, this is a flow. So if for your customer, the password change should only appear if someone comes in with mtown, with the old method, then you can just drag and drop the password change over here, as we will see later in the config that it's really drag and drop. So as you learned now, the new IAM Loginapp RESTUI is based on the RESTUI, on the REST interface, which is built within a flow engine. This brings following advantage if you migrate to the new IAM Loginapp RESTUI. If you migrate, you can have multiple flows. That means you can have for each target application a separate login flow if that suits the client journey. With target application, we often speak about the path that the user enters or the application that he opens in the mobile app. You can also now use the same flows for web and app. As we saw, they use now the same flow engine, the same technology. The flow engine makes it very flexible to also have login flows for complex processes. And we're using an advanced technology with stable APIs, which allow you really to use each step or the whole flow also as an API, and to add it with your other systems or your environment. We have an attractive user experience without programming, as the flows are really adjustable to each application. And we have a simple adoption to the corporate design, as we have this engine, this UX engine, which allows the web designer to make the design in a modern way, even without having the application. We have extendable flows. Within the flows, you can also add custom steps, which gives you another level of flexibility when it comes to special steps that you want to do within a flow for your environment. A good example here is kind of if we have a bonus code that we need to check in a database, if the user has a voucher or something, that he can enter this bonus code. There are many others. So as we know now why we should change, because we want to have all these new advantages, we need to look at when is a good time to change. To understand the right timing to change, it's that we have two very important, or we have two questions that we ask our Airlock partners. First of all, do you have a new customer? If you have a new customer, please go to the new Loginapp RESTUI, as the old JSP Loginapp will be deprecated and will be taken out in the next version, IAM 8.0, as I'll show you later. If you have an existing Airlock customer, then look with your customer, be aware that as soon as the customer wants to have some change, some adjustments, that you should be ready to go to the new Loginapp RESTUIs. Very good moments are adjustments if you have new use cases. So if the Airlock customer has new use cases within the login, or he wants to use new self-services or other use cases. If he wants to improve the customer journey, as this is one of the main reasons why we changed it with the Flow engine, as we found out that the customer journey and for an Airlock customer to have control over his customer journey is very important. If an Airlock customer makes a design update or a refresh of the design, it's also a good moment to change to the new Loginapp RESTUI, because design changes are much easier and in the long term stable when done on the new Loginapp RESTUI. Also, we have customer where the mobile app and the web flow are different as of the technology as I explained before, and they really are picky about having the same flow. For these customers, it's also a good reason to migrate early. As I said before, there will be a certain point where you have to migrate. So at the moment we're here, 2021, we just released our new IAM 7.5, which we're very proud of. And next year, probably in the end of Q1, we will release IAM 7.6, which will be the last Airlock IAM release, including the JSP login app, the old UI. By probably end of Q3, approximately September 2022, that's next year, with IAM 8.0, we will release our first version without the JSP login app. But the IAM 7.6 will be still supported until the end of 2023. So for you, that means if your Airlock customer has a new design, new use cases, or a good reason to go to the new IAM Loginapp RESTUI, then you should do so in 2022, which is the right moment. If that's not the case, then latest the Airlock customer should take the budget to go and make the change for 2023. So as we talk about it, why we should change and when it's a good time to change, we should now look at what does the change mean and how do we proceed such a change. If we look at how this change is done, it's very important that we have these 3 points in mind. First of all, don't have any false expectations. I will show in a few seconds what that means. Second, make an inventory and a concept, as the new login UI will be based on a flow, and you need to design the flow. You need to decide how the flow looks like for your end customers. And of course, you need to do the implementation after step 1 and 2. What does it mean, no false expectations? It means that we didn't build any automated migrations. So there is no button you can click and then directly from the old login flows, a new login flow which works the same is created. That because the old login flows were not flexible, and there is a lot of improvement that can be done. And it would have gone too complicated to get all the possible configurations and to make an automated migration. In regards of that, it would be better to change the flow anyway for your Airlock customer. We also didn't migrate all the functionalities, as certain functionalities were just not used by our Airlock customers anymore, or were for us not worth migrating. So there is no one-to-one replacement of your flow and your UIs that you have today to the new Loginapp RESTUI. Most important here are probably that we didn't migrate all the functions to the new Loginapp REST, to the new UIs. And for that, we have in our documentation, we have a special list of all the features that are discontinued. So I'm shortly show here the documentation, which is only online available for the public. And it's docs.airlock.com. And within the documentation, I'm now in the IAM documentation. We have a section called Loginapp RESTUI. Within this section, we have all these migration hints that we're going through now, like why to migrate, when to migrate, how to migrate, where we are now. And we also have a section called discontinued features. And here you have really a list of all the features that we're not planning anymore to use in the Loginapp RESTUI. If for any reason your Airlock customer insists to continue using one of this functionality, please inform us as early as possible. So as we have no more false expectations anymore, let's go and do our inventory and concept. So doing the inventory, we need to find out which use cases are still needed from our Airlock customer. Which use cases is he using today? Does he have any customization? Like, does he have custom code from us or from you directly as an Airlock partner? Does he have customized JSPs? What's with his texts? After we did the inventory, we need to do a reality checks. Are all the necessary features that he's still needing are covered by the new Loginapp RESTUI? And ideally, you also re-examine the requirements with the business and possibly redefine them, because the new flow engine really gives you the advantage of make the customer journey as tailored as possible to your Airlock customer, and you should use that new advantage. If you have done the inventory and checked the requirements, you're ready to write the concept where you determine how the flow will be for the end customer. It's very important that you check your flows when it comes to the customer journey, that it's really a flow which the customer cannot drop out or which he can do, and also security-wise. We made the flow engine as flexible as possible with still being in some security guidelines, but still you can do flows which are not the best when it comes to security. So really, once you designed your flows, check customer journey and check security. Now we have done our inventory and concept, we go to the implementation. And the implementation is really about what needs to be done now to get this flow and UIs working. So first of all, we need to configure the flow within the REST APIs. So that's basic configuration with databases, LDAP, peripheral systems, etc. Remain in place. So I correct myself here. So when it comes to reconfiguration of the REST API flows, the basic configuration stays in place. We really just need to configure the flow. Once we configure the flow, we can configure then the UI, and we also need to do the styling of the new Loginapp RESTUI. The styling is done, as we said, is most easy from the web designers with the SDK. And here a short hint to the SDK, where for the web designer is you can find the most important information. So the web designer really should read these 3 pages here. They're not all too long, and gets the SDK, and then he should be ready to go. As we really developed the whole thing state of the art for today's web designer. So let's look at the configuration part now. So what is it that you need to configure to get the flow work and to get the Loginapp RESTUI work? To get into the configuration, I will switch here directly into an Airlock IAM configuration. As we see here, that's our webinar system. I firstly logged in with it to the IAM as an admin. After I logged in as an admin, I went to configuration, and here I go straight to Loginapp. Here, when we click on Loginapp, we see directly now the new flows. We see kind of the authentication flow, the self-registration flow, public service flows, also protected self-service. So let's go to the authentication flow as an example to see how it looks like. If we go to the application flow, we see that we have multiple applications now, as I said, determined by path. We have a default applications, and we have further applications that we can add here. So let's go in this case to the default applications, where we see then that the default application has its ID with some some configurations that you know already from before with the identity propagation. But most important here, you have now not the authentication flow, which is mandatory for an application. And with it, when we go into the flow, we really see now the steps that the flow is going through. As you saw before, that within the flow, we have this kind of multiple possibilities with forks. And when I have a drawing of it, it's much more clear. If we go into the configuration, it's kind of a step-by-step flow. But when we look at it closer, we see that there is kind of a password authentication first. So it asks the username for password and his username. But then if he successfully went through the step as next step, we have a selection step, which is, as we saw before, a step which has certain options. And here we see really the power of these flows. Kind of when we go into the selection step, there are now multiple selections activated here. Of course, it's our demo config, so we have a lot of selections here with a lot of possibilities, which will be normally not the case. And also, as I said, I can kind of now say, okay, and before we go to the selection step, I want to have a mandatory password change, and I really can drag and drop here and kind of bring steps to before or later. So now we have seen how to configure the flow. I'll show here some more screens. We have seen that with the target application that we went into. We have seen the steps. And we have seen that there are multiple options of different steps. I want to show here one of my favorite steps shortly. It's a selection stop, which is called verify email. With this step, we built a step where we check if the user has entered his email, if the user has already an email address registered. If the user has no email address registered so far, we will ask the user to provide his email address and make a verification of it. So it just shows the power that now even through the login, we can check certain information, and through the information that we check, we can, within the flow, build in steps like this. And now comes the big questions. If I build steps like this, how does the UI work? Because this is a lot of flexibility, and I mean, is a UI really that adjustable? And the question is yes, as the UI configuration is directly based on the flow configuration of the REST API. So we're going back here, and we have been within the authentication flows. I'll go once again to our default application, and here within the default application, we go again to the flow. I'll jump here to UI settings, authentication UIs, exactly here. So we have the authentication UIs for the flow that I said before. There is also a link upper, I didn't find it now. So I'll go the other way. Otherwise, we go to UI setting, goes to authentication UIs, and here we see the same target applications as we saw before. We again take the demo authentication flow UI, and here we see now directly the configuration of the UI from the flow that I showed before. And the first thing we see, it's like, hey, moment, the steps are not here. We see here only the password authentication step. That's because the UI really uses the steps that are configured in the flow and directly renders them. So there is kind of a default UI for every step. And as long as you're happy with the default UI, you don't have to add the UI separately again to the configuration. You only have to add the flow. Here we added the password page because we want at the password authentication where the user needs to provide his password, we want some additional link. And with this custom UI, really added some links. We can also add additional buttons here, and you really can see it's a configuration thing. So we can add buttons, take buttons away, and so on. So the new Loginapp RESTUI is really configurable and it's directly based on the flow. The UIs are existing for the authentication flows, for the user self-registration flows, for the password reset flows, and also for the protected self-service. There are Loginapp REST UIs. Actually, everywhere where you had before the JSP, before the JSP Loginapp with UIs. So after we configured the flow and after we configured the Loginapp REST UI, all we need to do is kind of change the login page type. And as soon as we change the login page type, this new flow is live. So we have seen now why we should change to the new IAM Loginapp RESTUI. We have seen when it's a good time to change and how the change is proceeded. Last but not least, we'll talk about the support that is available from us as a technology provider. Before we go into the support, it's very important that these migrations are thought to be done by certified Airlock engineers. And it helps if you have more than some understanding of what I showed you at the moment, because these flows go really deep into the product and they're connected with a lot of basic configuration. So it's important that the engineer has a good basic knowledge of the Airlock Secure Access Hub. Our Academy can also help to achieve that. Also, you need the knowledge of the REST flow APIs that I just showed now and of the REST UI. If it's your first migration of any customer or your first configuration of a IAM Loginapp RESTUI, we strongly recommend to do our Airlock Academy. We have a one-day academy especially for the Loginapp REST API and the Loginapp RESTUI. You can find our academies directly on our website if you go to events and then academy. Also, we will provide the direct link in the presentation here. So we are now clear that we need an engineer with the basics to go through this project, but still then we have help available. So this engineer has, first of all, the list of discontinued features, which he should know. So once he does the analysis of what is still used from the Airlock customer and what he wants to use in the future, he should check the features that he needs with the discontinued feature, but he also should check the feature reference we have for the Loginapp RESTUI. This is actually all the features that are supported, and it's divided by the different functionalities, kind of first password related features as an example. And here we really see the feature that could be configured in the old world that is used. And we see also from which version on it's supported on the new Loginapp RESTUI. This one is supported even before version 7.3. And you have here some hints which step you can use or should use to replace the old feature. So kind of if the Airlock customer at the moment has a password check configured and the password is on a database, then use the password application step and the in-memory password repository. If the password is on LDAP, then use also the password application step, but use the LDAP password repository. So this is really not a guide, it's kind of hints to help an engineer to configure the features from the old world within the new world. We also have help with our Airlock consultants if you need help. We help doing the inventory with a short analysis. We will analyze the configuration and show you which parts are already which parts of the configuration are available in the new world and how hard it is to migrate the certain parts. We also do then, based on after the analysis, make the migration consulting. In the migration consulting, really show how the configuration is done for the harder steps. So if there is no one, if the step is not available or if the flow is not available one-to-one anymore, we'll show how the new flow could be configured and what options you have. Also, we make migration support. We will help you doing the configuration. We will not do the configuration. As for us, it's very important that our Airlock partner know the configuration of the Airlock customers to support them in the operation. If you go on this link, which is also in the documentation you have from each service, you have more further information of what are exactly the deliveries, what is the offering, what is the pricing, and how does it look like. So if you want any help with one of these steps, with first analysis and doing the inventory, with making the solution design to migrate to it, and if you need migration support, contact us. So that was all the help and the different topics. Now we would have time for open questions. Dimos, do we have any open questions?
At this point, no, we don't have any open questions up to now.
Okay, good. Then I hope I wasn't too fast. Anyway, you will get an email with the link to our test zone with the presentation. You'll see there the slides, and you also have a link for the recording there where you can look through the whole webinar again. If you have further questions going to the way, please use your existing Airlock contacts and your existing channels for that. So there is nothing else for me to do than to thank you for your time and to join us for this webinar. Thank you.